man, cold and ruthless, ties a sick Mustang to a tree deep in the wilderness. Alone, weak, and surrounded by the howls of hungry wolves, the horse closes its eyes, ready to meet its end. But just as the wolves close in, something extraordinary happens. Something that will change everything. Stay with us for a powerful story of survival, courage, and unexpected bonds that defy all odds. The bitter chill of dusk settled over the Montana wilderness, painting the sprawling forest in shades of gray and amber. The world seemed still, save for the faint rustling of leaves and the occasional howl of wolves echoing from the distant hills. Among the tranquility of nature, a grim scene disrupted the harmony. A Mustang, thin and trembling, stood tied to a towering pine tree. His head hung low in exhaustion. The Mustang, once a proud creature of the wild, now looked like a ghost of its former self. Its ribs jutted out beneath its dull chestnut coat, every breath labored and shallow. A thick rope bit into its neck, tethering it tightly to the tree. The horse's legs quivered, its hooves digging weakly into the cold earth. Could barely stand, yet it was forced to face the cruelty of fate. A man stood nearby, his shadow stretching long in the fading light. John Harper, a rugged rancher in his late 40s, watched the horse with an expression as cold as the wind. His boots crunched against the frosted ground as he adjusted the rope, ensuring it wouldn't give way. "There's no use keeping you," he muttered, his voice devoid of emotion. "You're more trouble than you're worth." The Mustang's large, glassy eyes briefly flicked to John, but there was no fight left in the animal. It was sick, its strength sapped by days of neglect. John had found the horse a week ago, limping and clearly abandoned by its previous owner. At first, he had thought of nursing it back to health, but with mounting debts and an already struggling ranch, he decided the horse wasn't worth the effort. John stepped back, pulling his coat tighter against the icy wind. The howls of wolves grew louder, closer. He glanced at the horizon, where the sun was sinking fast behind the jagged peaks. "They'll find you soon enough," he said quietly, almost to himself. He turned on his heel and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the forest without a second glance. The Mustang remained motionless, its head drooping as its ears flicked toward the distant howls. Night was falling quickly, and with it came the predators. The wolves, emboldened by hunger, would soon pick up the scent of a helpless animal. The horse shifted slightly, its legs wobbling beneath its weight, and let out a weak, mournful whinny. It wasn't a call for help. There was no one left to hear it. It was a sound of resignation, an acknowledgement of its fate. The first wolf appeared just as darkness blanketed the forest. Its glowing eyes shone like lanterns in the shadows, its sleek body moving silently through the underbrush. A second wolf joined moments later, then a third. They formed a loose circle around the tree, their low growls rumbling like distant thunder. The Mustang flinched, its nostrils flaring as the scent of danger filled the air. One wolf crept closer, its teeth bared in anticipation. It crouched low, ready to lunge when suddenly a strange sound echoed through the forest. A high-pitched whistle, sharp and piercing, cutting through the tension like a blade. The wolves froze, their ears swiveling toward the source of the sound. The Mustang, too, raised its head slightly, its ears flicking forward for the first time in hours. The whistle came again, followed by a rustling in the trees. A figure emerged from the shadows, carrying a lantern that cast flickering light across the scene. The wolves snarled but hesitated, their eyes darting between the figure and the horse. The man stepped closer, and as he entered the dim light, his features became clear. A wiry old hermit with a weathered face and sharp, determined eyes. "Get out of here," the man barked, swinging the lantern in a wide arc. The wolves growled but began to retreat, their instincts telling them this new arrival was not to be trifled with. The pack slowly disappeared into the darkness, leaving the Mustang and the man alone beneath the towering pine. The hermit approached the horse cautiously, his eyes narrowing as he took in its condition. "Well, aren't you in a sorry state?" he muttered, pulling a knife from his belt. The Mustang tensed but didn't resist as the man carefully cut the rope binding it to the tree. "Whoever left you here wanted you dead," he said, his voice softening. "But I reckon you've got some fight left in you yet." As the last strand of rope fell away, the Mustang collapsed to the ground, its legs too weak to hold it up. The hermit crouched beside it, placing a hand on its neck. "Easy now," he murmured. "We'll get you out of here." With surprising strength for his wiry frame, the hermit fashioned a makeshift sled from fallen branches and hauled the Mustang onto it. The horse didn't protest, its body limp with exhaustion. The hermit hitched the sled to his mule, and together they began the slow trek back to his secluded cabin deep in the forest. The Mustang's eyes fluttered shut as the rhythm of the mule's hooves lulled it into a restless sleep. For the first time in days, the horse wasn't staring death in the face. And though its journey was far from over, it had found something it hadn't expected in the heart of the wilderness. Hope. The dawn broke over the forest, spilling golden light through the dense canopy of trees. The hermit's cabin sat in a small clearing, its rough wooden walls blending almost seamlessly with the natural surroundings. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, a sign of life in this isolated sanctuary. Inside, the Mustang lay sprawled on a bed of hay in a corner of the cabin, its shallow breaths the only sound in the stillness. The old hermit, whose name was Eli, moved quietly around the room. His wiry frame and weathered hands betrayed a life spent in solitude, carving out an existence in the unforgiving wilderness. He glanced over at the Mustang, his sharp eyes studying the animal's every twitch and movement. "You're a tough one," he muttered, stirring a pot of herbs and water over the fire. "Most wouldn't have made it through the night." Eli had seen his fair share of cruelty in his years, but finding the Mustang tied and abandoned had stirred something in him. He couldn't fathom what kind of man would leave a creature to die like that. As he worked, memories of his younger days surfaced. Days when he'd lived in the world beyond the forest, where greed and neglect often overshadowed compassion. He shook the thoughts away and focused on the task at hand. The horse stirred, its ears flicking at the faint crackle of the fire. Eli approached slowly, holding a steaming bowl of the herbal mixture. "This will help," he said softly, kneeling beside the animal. The Mustang tensed but didn't resist as Eli gently dripped the warm liquid into its mouth using a wooden spoon. The horse's nostrils flared, and its eyes opened slightly, meeting Eli for the first time. In that brief moment, something passed between them, an unspoken understanding that neither of them was ready to give up. Over the next few days, Eli devoted himself to nursing the Mustang back to health. He named the horse Ember, a nod to the faint spark of life that still burned within its weakened body. Every morning, Eli would gather medicinal herbs and forage for anything that could help restore Ember's strength. He cleaned the animal's wounds with care, his hands steady despite the horse's occasional protests. Ember began to show signs of improvement. Its coat, once dull and matted, started to regain a faint sheen. The horse's breathing became steadier, and its eyes grew brighter with each passing day. Eli noticed the change and allowed himself a small smile. "You've got fight in you, after all," he said one evening, sitting on a stool beside Ember. "More than most folks I've known." Despite the progress, Eli knew they weren't out of danger yet. The wolves that had circled the Mustang before hadn't gone far. At night, their howls echoed through the trees, a chilling reminder of the ever-present threat. Eli kept a rifle by the door and a lantern burning through the night, his sharp eyes scanning the shadows for movement. The tree line brought an unsettling thought. Someone had intruded on his isolated sanctuary. Most people in this area knew better than to venture this deep into the forest. Whoever it was, Eli was sure they had a purpose for being here, but he doubted it was a good one. By midday, Ember had begun to grow restless. The Mustang was pawing at the earth, his nostrils flaring as if something was amiss. Eli saw the change in the horse's behavior and gripped his rifle tighter. He trusted Ember's instincts. Animals could often sense danger long before it was visible. "Easy now, boy," Eli said in a low voice, walking toward the Mustang. "We'll figure this out." The sound of hooves soon pierced the quiet, faint at first but growing steadily louder. Eli's body tensed as he turned toward the source of the noise. From the trees, 3 men on horseback appeared, their faces hidden beneath wide-brimmed hats and scarves. They moved with purpose, scanning the clearing until their eyes locked on Ember. "There he is," the tallest man said gruffly, dismounting with a heavy thud. "Told you he'd be here." Eli stepped forward, positioning himself firmly between the Mustang and the men. "This is private land," he said calmly, his voice firm. "You have no right to be here." The man chuckled, hand resting on the revolver at his waist. "That horse doesn't belong to you, old man. He's ours. Ran off during a storm a while back. We've been looking for him ever since." Eli's jaw tightened. That horse was left for dead, tied to a tree like garbage. Doesn't sound like the kind of care a real owner would give him. The man's smile faded, his expression darkening. "Doesn't matter how you found him. He's ours, and we're taking him back." Eli raised the rifle, aiming it straight at the man's chest. "You're not taking him anywhere." The clearing fell into a thick silence, the tension hanging heavy in the air. The other 2 men shifted uncomfortably in their saddles, hands near their own weapons. Ember, sensing the threat, snorted and inched closer to Eli, his muscles taut with readiness. "You've got guts. I'll give you that," the man said, his voice dripping with mockery. "But you're outnumbered. You really think you can stop us?" "I don't care how many of you there are," Eli said coldly, his grip on the rifle unshaken. "That horse isn't going anywhere." The standoff stretched on, neither side willing to retreat. Eli's heart hammered in his chest, but his hands were steady. He had faced many dangers: wolves, storms, and the harsh wilderness. But this felt different. These men weren't just a threat to Ember. They threatened everything Eli had come to care about. The man raised his hand, signaling to his companions. "We'll be back," he said, his voice low and threatening. "Next time we won't be asking." With that, the men turned and disappeared into the trees, leaving the clearing eerily quiet again. Eli lowered his rifle, his mind racing. Whoever they were, they wouldn't give up easily, but Eli wasn't about to let them have Ember. That night, Eli worked to reinforce the cabin. He bolstered doors and windows, set traps around the perimeter, and kept his rifle within easy reach. Ember stood nearby, ever watchful. The Mustang had become more than just a companion. He was a symbol of resilience. Together, they would survive. As the moon climbed high above the forest, Eli sat beside the fire, his thoughts heavy. The wolves had been a test of strength. But this was something deeper, a test of will, a battle for what was right. He glanced at Ember. "We'll face them together," Eli said quietly, his voice filled with resolve. No matter what. The next morning, the forest was unervingly still. Even the birds were silent, as if they too were waiting for something. Eli stepped out of the cabin, rifle slung over his shoulder. Ember was grazing near the tree line, relaxed but alert. Eli could tell. The men would return, and this time they wouldn't be alone. By midday, the sound of hooves broke the stillness. Eli froze, grabbing his rifle and stepping outside. For men appeared from the trees, their horses powerful and their weapons drawn. The leader, the same tall man from before, dismounted with a cruel grin. "I told you we'd be back," he said, his voice filled with menace. Eli raised the rifle, his stance unyielding. "I don't take kindly to trespassers." The man chuckled. "You're out of your league, old man. For of us, one of you. Hand over the horse, and we'll let you walk away." Ember snorted, pawing at the ground. Eli's eyes flicked to the Mustang, and his resolve strengthened. "This horse is mine. You abandoned him, left him to die. That makes him mine now." The leader's grin faded, replaced by a cold, hard stare. "You've got guts. I'll give you that. But guts won't save you." The tension escalated quickly. One man reached for his pistol, but before he could draw, Eli fired a shot into the air. The crack of the rifle startled the horses and sent a flock of birds flying from the trees. "Next one won't miss," Eli said in a steady, calm voice. The leader raised his hand to stop the others. You think you can take all of us? You're just one man. Eli smirked. One man who knows these woods better than you. Suddenly, one of Eli's traps snapped shut, catching one of the men's horses by the leg. The animal reared, throwing the rider to the ground. Eli took the opportunity to step back toward the cabin, keeping the rifle trained on the remaining men. Leave now and no one else gets hurt. Step 1 foot closer, and I won't hesitate. The leader's face twisted with anger, but he understood Eli wasn't bluffing. Get him and get the horse, he ordered. The next moments unfolded in a blur of chaos. One of the men tried to lasso Ember, but the Mustang reared up, striking the air with his hooves. Eli fired again, grazing the man's shoulder. The attacker stumbled back as his horse bolted into the trees. Ember, wild and untamed, charged at one of the remaining men, his hooves striking the ground with thunderous force. The man panicked as his horse stumbled and retreated. Ember's raw power was too much to handle. Eli took advantage of the distraction, aiming at the leader, who was now backing toward the trees. This isn't over, the man growled before turning and fleeing into the forest. The others quickly followed, retreating in disarray. As the dust settled, Eli lowered his rifle, his heart still pounding with adrenaline. Ember stood in the middle of the clearing, chest heaving, eyes blazing. Eli smiled. You did good, boy, he said softly. The men had been driven off for now, but Eli knew they would be back, and next time they would have to be ready.